Welcome to Mali Klein's Talks on Essiac, August 2018 at Arupa.
Okay. The formula was first created by an Ojibwa Indian back in the 1800s. How did it survive until today?
Oh, this is my favourite. How many books have I written? It is 5. Stating very clearly, there is absolutely no proof that the Native American medicine man came from the Ojibwa nation. Sheila and I went through very carefully every bit of research. We were doing this for Essiac Secrets when we were writing that in 2000. And we found there were 6 different nations living in northern Ontario in the 1890s. And the Native American medicine man could have come from any one of them. Alternatively, he could have been a refugee from the Indian Wars. Many of them were crossing the border from the States into Canada as safe refuge. So, I know it's a great myth, and it goes on beautifully, but there is absolutely no proof. And the medicine man certainly did not say which of the nations he came from. They're all members of the tribe. He was just an incredibly special, obviously, medicine man because he was travelling alone. He was alone in an English mining camp, which is unheard of. I mean, what is a Native American medicine man doing alone in an English mining camp? But there he was. And he was clearly very old. And from the way, everything you get from the story, and I worked it out. I looked up when English people were being encouraged to emigrate to Canada. There was a big sort of push on, 1892, 93. And the boats normally sailed in the spring and summer because the seas were a lot less rough, like the Vikings going across the North Sea. I mean, you went a Viking in the spring and the summer. And he took the unprecedented step of actually giving Mrs. Johnson, the Englishwoman, the details of the formula and showed her how to collect the herbs and how to dry them. I mean, that's huge. Native American medicine men usually kept their pharmacopoeia to themselves, but he did that. And to me, this indicates that he knew he didn't have much longer living, and maybe he wasn't going to make it through the next winter. Because winters in northern Ontario are long and they're hard. And after all, he was a nomad. So, what's the rest of the question, honey? I forgot.
How did it survive until today?
How did it survive? Well, he gave the formula to Mrs. Johnson. He made the formula exclusively for this woman, menopausal woman with breast cancer. She kept it secret for 30 years, probably under his instruction, because if you disperse energy, it becomes weaker. In order to keep the strength and the healing power in the formula, keep quiet about it. And she did that for 30 years until she was elderly, in her early 80s, when she was in hospital in Haileybury in North Ontario, and she met Reen Case, who was head nurse. And the story's been very well documented. Reen noticed her scarred breast and asked her what had happened. And then the story came out. And Mrs. Johnson gave Reen Case the formula. And again, it was Mrs. Johnson's choice to give her the formula. So this thing has been handed on voluntarily. It's really important to actually take that on board. It wasn't extracted for somebody, with bribery and whatever. This thing was freely handed on. The Native American elder to Mrs. Johnson to Reen Case. And Reen Case didn't do anything with it. This was 1922 when she got the formula. And she didn't do anything with it until 1924, when her aunt became sick with liver cancer, Marisa Potvin. And then it was the 8-herb formula then, and she, as she said in her memoir, I was Canada's cancer nurse. I found the herbs with difficulty because some are easier than others. Her family owned an island called Case Island on the lake, and she used to go out there to get her sheep's oil. So she put them together and she made up the formula, and her aunt wasn't, she was clearly terminal, and this is 1924. So she asked Dr. Fisher, who was her aunt's doctor, could she make up the formula and try it out? And he said, well, why not? And they did. And I think Mrs. Potvin lived for another 21 years. She was, in 2 months, she was eating normally, the tumour had gone down. And so this then created the interest. Reen Case saw it working again, Dr. Fisher saw it working, and then and he encouraged her to not only refine it down to 4 main herbs, because obviously it had been quite difficult to find all 8 herbs, but he also encouraged her to develop an injectable therapy.
Okay.
And this was the key to her success in Bracebridge Clinic in the 30s, because she had a laboratory in her mother's place in Toronto, and she had lab mice, they had human carcinoma. And so she made up decoctions of each of the 8 herbs and injected the mice with the herbs. And the one herb, most of them, they injected anaphylactic shock, they died of shock, but not when sheep's oil was injected. And that was the one herb that could be injected. And so this was the basis of her success in the Bracebridge Clinic. Most of the patients received the injections and took the medicine home to take, the bottles of medicine. But some people couldn't take the injections because they're incredibly traumatic, they're acidic. I mean, as you know, as I've told you, I've had the injection, that was my choice. I just knew Mary McPherson and myself, Mary, who worked with Reen Case, we were the only 2 who'd had the injection. So painful. I never want to have that again. It was just terrible. And in the book, I describe. And in fact, we got half the syringe into me, and I said, "That's it. I just stop this. Everything's in spasm. Right up it. Woo, went in here in the upper deltoid muscle." But you have to do things to experiment. You have to do that. So from there, Reen developed the 4 herb. But she wasn't just using 4 herbs. I mean, the one she eventually gave to the Respirant Company after, in 1978, that was 4 herbs. But Reen was the best thing ever for Essiac, and also the worst. And this is the truth. This is the truth. She worked with it. I mean, she certainly suffered for it through the days of the Bracebridge Clinic. She was always being threatened with being put into jail. That's not good for sleep. But at the same time, she didn't help by she had the chance 3 times, really prestigious trials. And each time they came to nothing because she did not give them the right stuff. And she wouldn't even say what she was supplying. I mean, you can't work in a lab and be given an unknown substance that's probably herbs and then be expected to, use it on human cancer. You just can't do that. But Reen decided you could. I mean, she had the Dr. Bruce trials in 59 to 60. And then Sloan Kettering from 73, Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York from 73 to 76. And then in 1977, when the Homemakers article came out, she had Dr. David Wald and John Barker, who volunteered to trial Essiac on their patients. And she led them a dance. She didn't want them to discover the formula, so she would powder the stuff right down. And she said she used Indian rhubarb, but in fact she was using Turkish rhubarb. She was naughty, and she never once mentioned the roots, except, confidentially, in the letters to Dr. Chesterstock at Memorial Sloan Kettering, and that is the only proof we have that in fact she considered the roots of the herb to be of primary importance. And she used to say to Mary, without the roots in the formula, without the whole herb, then you might as well just, wash the Essiac down the drain. Interestingly enough, Mary didn't actually, although, she definitely knew about the roots in 1988 after Sheila had shown her the letters from Dr. Stock, between Dr. Stock and Reen Case. She got copies. But Mary never mentioned, because Reen didn't mention roots out of her house. Mary was incredibly loyal to Reen Case, totally honest, Mary Macpherson. And she would not mention anything that Reen hadn't mentioned. So, you had there was this problem that loyalty to Reen, and it has to be, I have to admit that when Sheila and I were asked to write the first two books, Gill and Macmillan from Dublin, they were a great company to work with. But I had to put the pressure on Sheila to make her agree that we had to actually include the information about the roots. Mm-hmm. And we had to open up a lot more about the archive, because she had this most amazing archive collection hidden away in her house. And when we were writing Essiac Secrets, she actually opened it up, so that I could start seeing all the papers, and she got out everything. But it took some persuasion, because, she had loyalty to Reen, she had loyalty to Mary, and there was a lot of outside pressure too from companies who were, had a monetary interest in it by then. So, it wasn't an easy situation.